What's up, everybody? Jared again. Today we're talking about a show that's definitely gonna get us demonetized on YouTube, Berserk. Based off the manga of the same name, Berserk is one of the oldest ongoing series out there. The anime premiered in 1997 before going on an almost 20-year hiatus, and has returned with a controversial new animation style. Since the show is still going, we can't quite decipher the entire message here. So while Guts' quest for revenge against the God Hand and Griffith deals with some fairly obvious themes, ranging from religion to free will, we're gonna leave that for a future video. Instead, we're here to talk about the most visually obvious and philosophically subtle aspect of the show. That's right, Berserk's metric crap ton of violence. Welcome to this Wisecrack edition on the philosophy of violence in Berserk. And as always, spoilers ahead. Now, I know it might seem like the phrase mindless violence was coined to describe Berserk, but what's going on beneath the surface of its BDSM-inspired angels and gruesome deaths is actually pretty smart. Berserk is unique not only in how it uses violence to horrify and mesmerize us, but also to transform us. To understand the violence in Berserk, we need to consider its genre. While the influences of psychological horror, cosmic horror, and even gore porn can be seen in Berserk, the show specifically rests in horror's monster subgenre. According to aestheticist Noel Carroll, monster horror has two very important implications. One, horror as a genre affords us a critical distance, allowing for a safe space for fascination to take root. Simply put, violence in real life is bad, but violence on screen is kosher. 2. The monsters depicted on screen embody what Carroll calls categorical violation. They defy traditional categorizations and simultaneously attract and repulse for the same reason. It's these 2 points that make Berserk so, well, Berserk. Why are we okay with witnessing Guts literally slice people in half? Because we view this over-the-top violence from a safe distance. And why do we find these awful acts of violence so compelling? Because violence in the show, like its subject matter, defies traditional categorizations. This blurring of typical categories and the fascination and repulsion that it generates is Berserk's calling card. These binaries can be distinctions between life and death, such as when Guts mows down a group of animated skeletons, or the distinction between man and beast in the Apostles. But they can also be less literal. For example, Father Mozgu's head-bulging sadist extraordinaire claims to be an agent of God, but is actually serving the demons. He and his ragtag team of torturers even gain wings as if they're literally angels. Lady Farnese, now seeing the truth behind her order, realizes what they actually are. Even Guts, the epicenter of the show's violence, embodies this idea of categorical violation. He's both a murderer and a hero, an object of religious prophecy and an anti-religious crusader. In the original anime, Guts is branded as a ritual sacrifice for the God Hand, a moment that was supposedly preordained. But Guts managed to defy fate and survive. Guts is simultaneously an object of religious prophecy and a middle finger against faith. Or as Farnese originally sees him, and how Guts sees himself. And much like the man himself, Guts' violence possesses this trademark sense of categorical violation. It repels us, yet attracts us. It's animalistic, yet refined. This is most apparent when Guts puts on the Berserker armor and blurs the line between man and beast, his armor even transforming to mirror this change. As Guts releases a savage cry and charges the battlefield, you can't help but notice the compelling choreographed ferocity here. As his opponent Grunbeld notes, and when Guts delivers the final blow of the first bout, he does so with a grace that is, more than anything, well, beautiful. While it might seem strange, according to thinker Joel Black, an act of violence can, in fact, be beautiful. In his book, The Aesthetics of Murder, he writes, "If any human act evokes the aesthetic experience of the sublime, certainly it is the act of murder." If murder can be experienced aesthetically, the murderer can in turn be regarded as a kind of artist, a performance artist or anti-artist whose specialty is not creation, but destruction. Of course, we're not giving the thumbs up to murder, but Black's point is that when performed with the right craft, style, and force, violence can have an almost transcendent effect on its viewers. This idea that something can leave us in awe and transcend understanding is what philosopher Immanuel Kant referred to as the sublime, or the state of mind created when a certain experience stops being an object of our judgment and starts controlling it. Starting to sound familiar? Like monster horror, the sublime has the power to violate the purpose in respect of the judgment, and to do violence to the imagination. It works through a process of categorical violation, breaking down the divisions between our commonly held beliefs. So, how does the sublime in Berserk transform us? By forcing us to reconsider our traditionally held ideas, specifically beauty. Throughout both the new series and the 1997 version, we are bombarded with intensely violent images that are, in their own way, beautiful. When Griffith and his band of heroes, or monsters, liberate Vertanis from the invading Kushans, Griffith's seer Sonia comments on the aftermath.
夕日が血を照らして、すべてが赤く、赤く。ただ凄惨なはずのこの風景。けれどそれは、例えようもない一枚の絵のようでした。
Here, the senseless death and destruction wrought by Griffith's army overwhelms Sonia, possessing a beauty that challenges her very idea of what beauty is. Through tapping into the sublime, violence in Berserk frequently becomes a vehicle for change. Sonia, opening her eyes to the dazzling death brought by Griffith, leaves her old life in the village behind and follows Griffith on his journey to become God King. But Berserk is very careful to make sure it doesn't depict all violence as evoking this sense of awe. In fact, the show juxtaposes the artful killing of Guts and Griffith with ordinary violence seemingly common to everyday life. Whether it's the villager stoning someone to death or a knight whipping a prostitute from the comfort of his horse, these moments are strangely mundane, petty, and underwhelming. In the end, these figures and institutions lack the skill and artistry to evoke the sublime. If skill and craftsmanship are the keys to evoking total awe and wonder, then Guts can be viewed as something like a violent performance artist. So what's the effect of Guts' visceral and bloody art? Does it have a greater purpose, or is it just, as French writer Théophile Gautier calls, art for art's sake? While it might be tempting to think it's the latter, Guts' acts of violence do have a greater purpose, demonstrating the hideous nature of the societal violence and ultimately disrupting it. Through the distinction between artistic and non-artistic acts of violence, the show glorifies those that work against the grain of society, contrasting them with the drab cruelty of the institutions themselves. A prime example is Griffith when he's reborn into the world, fulfilling the wishes of the egg of the perfect world to upend the world order.
この世界はあまりに不完全だ。理不尽に降りかかる死。そこから逃れるための生あるものの苦痛と恐怖。その混沌を覆い隠すために打ち立てられた欺瞞に満ちた秩序。そして歪んだ秩序に安寧し。True
to this cause, Griffith and his army take back Vertanis. In this instance, Griffith is working against society, his upstart rebel army ousting the Kushans in one fell swoop. But once Griffith reinstates the Holy See's control of the city, he becomes enmeshed in the established power structure. Typical to the violence perpetrated by institutions, Griffith's violence afterwards becomes tasteless and crude. When Guts and company arrive later at the city, they find hundreds of slave traders hanged as enemies of the state. Far from possessing beauty, this scene is sterile, methodically organized, and revolting to Shirka. Unlike Griffith, though, Guts' violence is never part of a greater societal system. Guts fights only for himself, making enemies out of whole armies, religions, and even godlike beings. In fact, the brand on Guts' neck attracts demons and apostles, continually forcing Guts to abandon society. In the first episode, Guts attempts to re-enter society by agreeing to take a carriage ride with a kindly man and his daughter. Guts falls asleep, only for his brand to attract demons who slaughter the father-daughter duo. Instead, Guts is cursed to live and act on the peripheries of society. His violence becomes a destructive force upon the world. Lady Farnese realizes this when she becomes disillusioned with the Holy See as all hell breaks loose on the battlefield.
あの黒い剣士が現れると壊れていく。私の見知った世界が音を立てて崩れていく。
Guts' violence, invoking the sublime, becomes a powerful force that disrupts the status quo and forces people to renegotiate their core ideals. For Farnese, this results in her abandoning her post and even her god.
私は黒い剣士を追う。私は漱石を捨てる。
In tying artistic violence to the individual and unartistic violence to society, Berserk is challenging us on where we focus our attention. While we're drawn to the shining brilliance of Guts' violence, we're seemingly blind to the everyday violence that takes place in the greater world of Berserk. We as viewers live for the battle scenes, the crystallization of violence. But this ignores the existence of structural violence, or the idea that certain power structures can prevent less powerful groups of people from meeting their basic needs. True to form, look who gets screwed over by society in Berserk. Ishidoro is essentially forced into servitude, being the glorified busboy of a mercenary group. Casca, essentially a mental invalid, is singled out for death by Father Mozguz and almost raped by a strange fertility cult thing. And Luca and her gaggle of young friends are forced to risk their lives by working as prostitutes at the base camp, both servicing military officers while simultaneously fearing those very officers' judgments. Berserk is challenging our ideas of what peace really is. We like to think that peace begins when the battle stops, when Guts has finished putting his opponents through the proverbial blender. But because we can't take our eyes away from the dazzling acts of violence committed by Guts and others, we're unable to notice or care about all the other acts of violence committed by society. It's in the lulls between battles when Berserk decides to show us the artless and repulsive violence in the world around them. In these rare moments when we see people stoned to death, or mountains of dead bodies, or even a lake of blood and entrails, we see the limitations of thinking that peace is simply the absence of war or battle. But for all those complex intellectual ideas, we don't blame you if you only remember Berserk as the anime where an anthropomorphic horse licks a semi-naked woman. And there goes the last of our YouTube AdSense revenue. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching, Wisecrack. If you're hungry for more Berserk, look no further than our friends over at Verve, that's VRV. They want to give you 7 days free to check out all the shows they've got to offer. Made by the fun folks over at Crunchyroll, Verve is a mega service that gives you unlimited access to channels like Crunchyroll and Funimation, so you can instantly watch all the best anime, subbed and dubbed, including Dragon Ball Super, My Hero Academia, Black Clover, Boruto, Food Wars Season 3, and of course, Berserk. And if you think that sounds great, Verve is giving Wisecrack fans 7 days of free HD ad-free viewing for all 10 of their channels. And when you order the combo pack, you get everything. That includes Shudder, where you can get your horror fix, and Verve Select, where you can check out Season 1 of Harmon Quest, and then get the first episode of Season 2 for free. New episodes of Season 2 launch at 3 p.m. Pacific on Fridays. So head over to verve.co/Wisecrack or click the link in the description to get your free 7-day Verve combo pack. You can get it on your desktop, on their mobile app, Roku, PlayStation, and Xbox. And thanks to Verve for sponsoring this video. And we've got tons of great stuff on the way, including videos on the Emoji Movie and The Prestige, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. That's all for now. Catch y'all next time. Peace.